بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated in the Holy Quran, and what he says is the truth. In the chapter of Al-Hajj, chapter 22, verse 74, Allah says, وَمَا قَدَرُ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَقَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this wonderful verse, he says, and surely they did not value Allah, his true value. They didn't realize his true worth. Surely Allah is all powerful and all endeared. Sadaq Allahu al-Aliyyul Azim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We apologize for the delay today. We had some technical difficulties. So we appreciate you bearing with us. Today I wanted to talk about a very important topic, a topic that really touches all of our lives. Valuing things. How is it that we value things? Now, this is an important topic because we know that in our daily lives, we believe that we value things, right? I mean, we value our computer and what it can do for us. We value our phone and how important it is for us to communicate with each other because we can't without it, right? We value our car. We value our parents. We value our friends. We value our job and our work. And at no time is it more evident and obvious to us that we should value things that perhaps we may have never thought of before, that we may have taken for granted other than in this time of self-isolation and social distancing. So then this topic of value and how to value things is extremely important for us to understand, especially in these trying times that we're in. Now, in order to understand this topic fully, I wanted to address it from three perspectives. The first is the logical perspective. The second is the psychological and academic perspective. And the third is the Islamic perspective. Now, let's start with the logical perspective. So what is the necessity then of value? And how do I establish a value system? Because understanding the value of things is extremely important. Now you might say, well, I do understand the value of things because I know, like we mentioned before, that I value paying my bills and therefore I must value getting a job, right? Or having someone to spend on me for some of us. So I know that I value transportation because without it, I can't get from my home to my work or from my home to my school. I know that I value freedom. Because today, with the coronavirus happening, many of us feel as though we're imprisoned in self-isolation and containment. So the only issue here is that, what about things that such as materialistic things, right? Many of us, we have spent so much energy, and all of us, of course, are guilty of this, right? Me included, that we look at materialistic things and that's how we understand value. We understand it from that lens, from that perspective. Now, this is what I'd like to deal with here. So if I look at a Louis Vuitton bag, for example, I see the price tag on it, and that to me gives it its value, right? If I look at a car, and such as a Bugatti or a Ferrari or a Porsche, the price tag on there gives it its value, correct? And of course, the marketing for it. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I know for a fact that my car also has value to me. It might not be a Bugatti, but I know that it has value because it takes me from point A to B. I also know that, the Prada glasses and the Gucci shoes and all of that stuff are given value by society. And that's why people, want to buy them for their craftsmanship or what have you. But also, I recognize that in work, people are also valued, right? So if you're on LinkedIn, for example, you can actually find what people's market value actually is depending on their experience, depending on their education, right? So then we understand value mostly from a physical standpoint, mostly. That's not to say that we don't value our parents, but we do become heedless in those things that tend to have metaphysical value. In Arabic, we call it qima ma'nawiyya, right? So the question is then, why is it that I focus on so much of the physical value of things as opposed to the metaphysical? Well, and that's really because, I only see and perceive with my vision and my senses only really physical things, right? I feel pain, I see danger, I see beauty, I hear beautiful things, I hear bad things, correct? So these faculties and these senses, if they're employed towards only looking at the materialistic metaphysical things, then they will be preoccupied by them. If they're heedless and unknowing of the metaphysical part of our existence, then what happens is they tend to either not know about it, or they tend to ignore it, or we might tend to just be, outright or downright heedless. Okay, so why is that the case? And how can I understand things from a metaphysical standpoint so that I understand the true value of things? Well, here's where we need to look at deep within ourselves. We know that first and foremost, we do have a physical form, and that physical form truly is what is the form that we know, that's clear to us because we're visual beings, right? And that's a physical form. Now, but we also know that we have an intellect, and we know that the intellect is metaphysical. So notice we have one metaphysical to one physical right now. We also know we have a nafs, and we said that the nafs anchors the soul to the human body, right? The nafs acts like the anchor, and it's like gravity. It pulls you down to the materialistic world, and that's why it has materialistic tendencies. We also said that we have a qalb, and that qalb, the metaphysical qalb, is the place where decisions are made. Now, so far we have 3 metaphysicals versus 1 physical. Okay, so what else do we have? We also know that we have emotions. We have anger, we have desire, we have imagination, right? So far I have 7 things, one of which is metaphysical, is physical. The rest are all metaphysical. Now, if I understand that correctly, then by our normal, logical standards, rational standards, then that would mean that I should really focus on which? The physical, which is 1, or the majority, which is metaphysical. Of course, you'll agree with me. It has to be that I have to focus on the majority, which is metaphysical. So why is it then that I focus on the physical? Again, because we are visual beings, right? We touch and feel, we really focus on things that we can understand through our senses, tangible things. And so once I understand that, I really have a paradigm shift, because I recognize now something that I didn't recognize before, that I'm more metaphysical than I am physical, which means really that I should focus on, 6 times more on my metaphysical than I should on my physical. If I'm exercising my body, an hour a day, then I should literally be exercising, doing metaphysical training for my metaphysical for the metaphysical parts of my existence 6 times more than the physical training, right? If I want to be fit. But how many of us really do that? And why is it that we don't value the metaphysical? Because again, we don't see it, right? We don't see it. We take it for granted. And the reason why we don't see it is just like we said yesterday, we don't take the time to sit and contemplate, okay? So now that I understand this, I really need to look at things based on Tawheed. So I need to look at things based on where I fit in the world. That's what I mean. So and all purposeful. And therefore, I must thank him, because he has the greatest privilege upon me, because he created me and gave me this existence. And that means then that I have to dedicate all of my faculties to him. Everything, physically, metaphysically, everything has to work towards Allah. What have I done here? What I've done here is I've recognized the value of Allah in this world, and I've used him as the reference point from which to value everything else, right? And once I realize this, now, if it's drinking water, I say I dedicate drinking water to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that I can worship him better, right? So I say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When I get into my car, I say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Oh Allah, make this trip a successful one in your service, right? I dedicate a portion of my money when I work towards charity, right? So that I purify. I pay khums on my profits so that I can purify my wealth, right? I spend time and I give each person their right based on the treaties of rights of Imam Sajjad, salamullahi alayhi. And those are standards that are divine standards that were given to me by Allah. And therefore, these are the standards by which I live my life. And all that shows what? It shows my dedication to Allah. Why? Because you see, just like I believe in the value of a car, to me, living in, let's say, Detroit, right? I recognize that I can't get anywhere really without a car in the greater Detroit area. And therefore, I believe in its importance to me. So I buy it. And I am committed as a result to taking care of it. So there's that value, belief, commitment system. We do it with everything else in our lives. And so we must do the same thing with the metaphysical. So I value Allah's importance in my life because he gave me all that I have. And therefore, I believe that I must dedicate myself to him. I must commit myself to him. As a result, then I apply this belief, value, commitment system also to my metaphysical needs. So now that we understand the logical standpoint, that I can come to this truth and understand the logical and value of things is really to look through the lens of the metaphysical, right? The majority of the times. So now when I look at a computer, I say, well, would it please Allah for me to buy this computer? Why? What am I buying it for? If I want to buy that Louis Vuitton bag, now I don't think about, the bag as, the physical value that is given to it by those companies that make it, right? I don't look at it as haute couture. I look at it in the reality that it actually is, that it's just a bag, right? And I can just go and get a cheaper bag, and the money that's remaining I can give to those who are in need, those who are poor, because that would do what? That would make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy with me, pleased with me. And that is my greatest goal, to show him my gratitude, right? So based on that, then I understand that the marked up value of things isn't the reality. The reality is how Allah marks us up, right? The price tag that Allah places on us, right? And therefore the price tag of a mu'min, of a believer who dedicates themselves to Allah, who has a great system of values, that's the real measure of a person's worth, right? Of the worth of something. So let's look at what psychologists tell us. And I want to look at the 3 books that I specifically have spoken about before in prior lectures, but I want to look at it from a different perspective as it applies to understanding the value of things. So if I look, for example, at the book of Carol Dweck, Mindset, remember she mentions that people are of 2 types according to studies, and that is that there are people who have a fixed mindset and people who have a growth mindset. People who have a fixed mindset, they tend to be literally fixated on one thing, right? Meaning that if I give them, let's say, the value of something, they'll be fixated on that specific value. They might not look beyond it, right? They tend to be more structured in their thinking and more confined to just looking at something from one perspective, as opposed to looking beyond it, around it, behind it, before it, right? And so what happens as a person excuse me, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. A person then who has a fixed mindset is unable really to see beyond his struggle. And that is what Amy Cuddy showed us in the studies that she mentioned in her book, Presence, with those two groups of people that had to undergo an exam, right, as case studies. And they found that the one group that was primed and told that, this is it's not an important exam, don't get stuck on any questions, it'll be over soon, everything will be fine. Those that were primed that way, they all passed, while the others who weren't and were stressed by the examination monitors, they got stuck on the questions and they weren't able to finish the exam, and they all failed. And the reason why then is how they perceived stuff, right? How they perceived things. So if I can look beyond, for example, the value of something that's being dictated to me. So in consumer psychology and behavioral psychology, what do they want to do? They want to fixate me on the price tag, on the value that I'm getting from this product, and that this price is a great deal, right? So consumer psychology, what they try to do is they try to figure out how it is that they can manipulate our minds so that we can only think of things in accordance with the value that they set, not the true value of things, right? While someone who doesn't get fixated, doesn't fall into that trap, is the same type of person that's looking to get out of the rat race. They see the reality of the game. They have a bird's eye view looking down, just like a drone that's flying over things, right? They see the overall picture and they realize that this truly isn't the reality of things. So they tend to be more of the bargain hunters. They tend to be the ones that, look out and think outside of the box. And so a person with a growth mindset is able to look beyond the simple value of things that are dictated to them. And they can literally tag new value to things, okay? And they can determine whether something really is valuable to them, because something can have value, but it might not be valuable to you because, it's not going to help you in your life. And determining that is really based on the mindset that you have. It's based on going back to sharpening your saw, to recognizing your moral compass, as Stephen Covey says in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And then what happens is you have basically a base from which to work, a foundation from which to assign the value of things. Remember, he said, you need to value your relationships with your family and give them time, right? Give them value is basically what he was saying. Value your work, but give it the time that is allotted to it in your day. Don't give it more than it deserves. And this is all based on recognizing the value of things. But we can't do that without, sitting back and contemplating and thinking deeply about the value of things and their importance in our life and the reality of their importance and their value. Now, also we know that Kelly McGonigal in her book, The Upside of Stress, even though with many studies that she conducted herself, she used to see the negativity of stress, its negativity on the human body and human health. She later came to find out that there were studies that showed that there were people who in stressful situations actually thrived, and that all went back to how they perceived things, right? So meaning that if somebody is in a struggle, he's seeing that struggle and the value of that struggle to him. And so he believes in its value, and therefore he's able to look beyond it and understand that this is the value of this to me is basically the value of something that I have to own myself, because it's tailor-made for me from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah would not burden me with more than I can handle, because otherwise it would be a deficiency from him, and Allah is all perfect. And therefore what happens is, once I take ownership, I recognize that the value of this struggle is to do what? To make me a better human being, because Allah only wants the best for me, right? And so once that group did that, you found that the stress actually helped their health as opposed to being destructive to their health, right? And it's all then in looking beyond. Changing your perspective means looking beyond what you see now, beyond that finger, that you're pointing at yourself, that you're focusing on, towards what's greater than that, having that drone and bird's eye view of things, right? And really perusing and being honest with yourself. And that brings us then to the Islamic point of view of things. In Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in that verse, it's a really beautiful verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. So that's what we're going to do. Allah says, do they not take the time to understand the Holy Quran, or are there locks on their hearts? So we're going to focus and try to understand. So now I want you to put your thinking caps on with me. I want you to wear your garb of the great thinker and contemplator. And I want us to really look at this verse and analyze it. Allah says, وَمَا قَدَّرُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. Allah says in this verse in Surah Al-Hajj, chapter 22, verse 74, He says, and surely they did not appreciate Allah's true worth. Remember what we said in the logical discourse? We said that first I have to start from a base, and that base has to be Tawheed, has to come from realizing where I fit in this world, right? And, value then, the value of things and my core values also have to be based on that. So once I uncovered that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly is worth appreciating, because He gave me worth. He is all perfect and He chose for me to exist. And I must dedicate my life to knowing Him and honoring Him and thanking Him and showing my gratitude and appreciation through everything that He created and through following Him and being obedient to Him based on what He tells me to do, what He expects of me, and by emulating Him, right? In how He treats His creations. And so everything that I see then, I don't see anything at all except that I see Allah before it and after it and within it. And that's what Imam Ali salamullahi alayhi says so eloquently in one of his sayings. He says, مَا رَأَيْتُ شَيْئًا إِلَّا وَاللَّهُ أَمَامَهُ وَخَلْفَهُ وَفِيهِ. Meaning that Allah's everywhere. Allah's unlimited. Because how can you be before, after, and within and during something unless you're everywhere, right? Which means that the standard, Islam says the standard by which you make your choices, you live your life, is that. So when I look at something, I say, will this please Allah? If I face a situation, I say, will this please Allah? Once I face a situation, I say, it's got to be that it pleases Allah, that I go through this struggle to prove to Him my appreciation. The more able I am to go through these struggles, the more I can prove to Allah that I am close to Him, as we mentioned before. But notice Allah, what does He say here in this verse? He says, مَا قَدَرُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ. Right? As though Allah is kind of, in Arabic we say يَعَاتْبَك, meaning that He's just disappointed, right, in these people, saying, they really didn't give God His worth, unfortunately. Then what does Allah say after it? He says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَقَوِيٌّ عَزِيزٌ. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all powerful. Why don't they see this? And Allah is all endeared, right? Because once you look at and you realize the reality of who you are, how you came to be, and everything around you, that Allah gave them their worth by just merely bringing them into existence, and that everything has a purpose and therefore has a worth to me. And then based on that, I realize why an ecosystem can't run with its different parts, right? Let me give you a simple example. So in Australia, there are many settlers that actually moved from the West to Australia. And many of them, they had sugarcane plantations. And what they found was that there was a sugarcane beetle. And this sugarcane beetle would literally eat their harvest. So what they did was they introduced a non-native animal, a specific type of toad that eats the cane beetle. But again, it wasn't indigenous to that area. So what happened is they introduced it. As you know, toads, they proliferate very quickly. So they became very large in numbers, and they didn't have a natural predator in that ecosystem. So what they noticed was that even though it was helping their cane crops, many of the native indigenous animals were being affected negatively, either by dying through poisoning or just by being sickly, or what they found was that the toad itself had a toxin that literally poisoned the animals in that ecosystem. And so instead of helping the ecosystem, they ended up hurting it, right? So the moral of the story here then is that it's important for us to take an overall picture and realize the value of things. I'm reminded also by a story I might have mentioned to you, and that's that's that group of farmers that were in Britain, right? Those who were having a rodent problem, and then they introduced the hawks that I mentioned, and they found that the rodent population, though it decreased, the livestock was being killed. And the reason why is because the snakes didn't have the rodents anymore. The foxes didn't have the rodents anymore to eat, and they had to find another solution. So because they didn't recognize the value and the purpose of Allah's creations, they ended up messing up the system as opposed to improving the system, because they looked at things from a limited view. So if you look at things from a limited view, then you're going to get limited results. But if you look at things from how Allah perceives them and why Allah created them, and you realize that everything is created for a purpose, right? Then you realize at that point that the true value of things, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it beautifully in Surah Al-A'la. He says, سَبِّحِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ الْأَعْلَى, exalt by the name of your Lord who is most high. This is in chapter 87, verses 1 to 3. الَّذِي خَلَقَ فَسَوَّى, he who created and made. وَالَّذِي قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى, and he is the one that made everything according to a specific measure and according to a specific value, and then he guided it, either by giving its instinct, or by pre-programming it genetically, or by even providing it a mother and a father to nurture it and to make it stronger and better. And so from here then we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to value him, and we realize that the value of doing that is that we start to see the reality of things, and we connect with the metaphysical realities as a result. And that is reflective then of what we were able to come to as a conclusion in our logical discourse, as well as in our discourse of the social psychologists and behavioral psychologists that we looked at. So we don't want to be concerned then with that, materialistic price tag anymore. Now we put a divine price tag on everything. The reality of everything is clear to us now. Now, we're able to see things with that mind's eye. Imam Ali salamullah alayhi says it beautifully. He says, "احذر من فراسة المؤمن فإنه يرى بعين الله." Beware of the insight of a believer, for he sees proverbially with the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the vision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to see the reality of things. And we see today the reality of things. We're forced, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his mercy and his benevolence, we see the value of this specific virus, what it's done to us. Many of us, we say, oh, what value does it really have? But we look at things from the divine lens, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought this tiny little being that nobody can see, right? It's even hard to see under a microscope. And look at what it's done to the world. Now we recognize the value of our neighbor, and the value of our freedom, and the value of the air that we breathe, and the value of looking at the sky, and the value of looking into of touching our loved ones and kissing them, and being around our friends, right? And going out and enjoying life. We also realize that in enjoying life, as we did before, may have caused us to fall into heedlessness. And so we recognize that, how deficient we were, how much we didn't do what we should have done, how many things we missed out on, how many opportunities of charity, kindness, righteousness that we missed out on. And now we see the true value of those opportunities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the chapter of Al-Mu'minun, I want you to focus really on the chapter of Al-Hajj 22 verse 74. Remember that, right? 22:74. وَمَا قَدَّرَ اللَّهَ حَقَّ قَدْرِهِ Inna Allah laqawiyyun aziz. Surely they did not value Allah and give him his true worth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all strong and all endeared. But also the 3 verses of Sabbih Isma Rabbikal A'la, to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with specific values, with specific measures, right? And then he told us, then he gave us guidance in order to be able to then be guided to him, to how he wants us to live our lives. Imam Ali tells us that we have to see everything with that mind's eye, right? Anything we see, we always have to ask ourselves, does this please Allah? And everything that we see, we have to associate, we have to say, look how beautiful, look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this, look at its true worth, right? And then we also have to finish the lecture with these verses in the chapter of Al-Mu'minun, verses 99 and 100, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the soul of one of his worshippers. Allah describes it beautifully in this verse, and he says that this person says, Rabbi irji'un la'alli a'malu salih. Oh Allah, bring me back to this world. Give me an opportunity to do righteous deeds. This person has recognized the value, of the world. He's recognized the opportunities that were missed. What does Allah say to him? He says to him, Kalla, innaha kalimatun huwa qailuha. He says, no, it's a final word. You had your chance, you're done. Oh Allah, don't make us of those who are like that person that you described in the Holy Quran. Make us realize the value of this world, the opportunities we have in it, to come closer to you, to value you, to appreciate you, to show you gratitude. Ya Rahman Rahim. Allah, we ask you that you hasten the appearance of Al-Hujjah. We ask you that you allow us to recognize his value in our lives. We ask you, Ya Rahman Rahim, beseech you that you bestow your mercy on our sick, that you give them health, that you bestow your mercy on our dearly departed, and that you repay the debts of all those who are in debt. You remove the oppression from all those who are oppressed, and that you allow us, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, to see everything around us in its true value and its true worth, and that we are never heedless. We see you before, after, within, everything, for you are the unlimited creator. We recite the Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha and give its reward to all those that we mentioned. And I want to dedicate this lecture to 3 people specifically, and inshallah all of your dearly departed, to my father-in-law who passed away last year, to Hajj Abdullah Ham'a, who passed away a few months ago, a dear friend to the community and a dear friend to many of us. May Allah rest his soul. And as well to the father of a dear brother of mine, believing mu'min who passed away recently as a result of COVID-19, Al-Hajj Abu Ahmad Al-Khalisi. May Allah rest his soul. May Allah bestow mercy on all of them and widen their graves and reward them with the highest levels of heaven, inshaAllah. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلي يا ربي على سيدنا محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين والفاتحة على أرواح المرحومين مسبوقة مشفوعة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.